If you look at the history of the fire department, there was a culture of racism. There are openly segregated stations within the fire department and nobody does anything about it.
Here's these two dynamics. There's the ideal of brotherhood and union and fairness, and then you've got an unspoken system that undercuts that. This is the biggest hypocrisy I've ever seen in my life.
With nepotism on the job and just being like predominantly white male, it's not going to be fair.
African Americans were not well represented in areas where African Americans lived. The fire department was the one department where minorities were really underrepresented within the city, more so than any other department.
When we first came on, it was bad. They didn't want us there. They wanted us out of the stations. They felt like we had invaded their space. And also at the same time, you've got the affirmative action going on, so then they're resenting the blacks that are getting promoted ahead of them.
Even more so than just race, I think you have a culture of white male privilege.
I think throughout my career, I saw it more through the prism of the good old boy system. Any group that systemically is seeking to promote themselves is consequently seeking to demote someone else.
The city does not operate with the good business judgment.
So much stuff that they would sweep under the rug and hide and keep quiet and keep secret. And nobody would do nothing about it.
It's got to change from the top down. It isn't going to change from the bottom up.
"24 hours is a long time to spend. It's almost a third of your life if you don't count days off. It's almost a third of your life you spend in a firehouse. That makes for a pretty miserable life. It's one of the few professions these days that a person can go and start and stay there until a retirement age with a decent pension. It's an honorable profession. I mean, it was a tremendous blessing from God for me. I worked as a firefighter for the first 5 or 6 years of my career. I got promoted as an FAO, fire apparatus operator, which was still my designation when I retired. There was a lot of leverage inside the firehouse, unspoken rules to try to determine who would and who wouldn't go into certain spots. This is one of the reasons it was so hard to get into some of the busier stations, because they would have a tendency, if a guy wanted to change spots, and they could use trading, guys trading positions and things like that to keep the people they wanted in those spots, as opposed to letting them go up on bid sheets. It was used extensively. It was really the primary way that guys were able to shape culture of the dynamic of their shift and station. And so if there was a desire to keep a racial makeup of one way or the other, then it was used in that way.
I was the third black female to ever be hired on Kansas City, Missouri Fire Department. They told my dad that it was not gonna be easy for me, that it's a good old boys network, and that I was gonna have a lot of problems. But they couldn't just straight out tell me it was, gonna be like this. When I first got into the academy, guys that were already on the job came down, said, "You're probably not gonna make it. Why are you here? What are you doing here?" And like when we would have Saturday training, they would do crazy stuff like put wads of gum in my water. It was stressful, very stressful. I'm not gonna say that I was scared, but I was just really mindful of every little thing. Like if something was in my boots, they would put stuff in your bunker boots. A couple times people had bled out the air in my air tank. But I would always check my stuff, even not just once a day, several times a day. I would always check my equipment all the time.
The first one I handled was a trial in 2014. I probably got it in 2013. And we've had probably a half dozen cases. We have some pending right now. So if you look at the history of the fire department, there was a culture of racism, and things, they got more subtle. People weren't using the N-word as much as they had before, but back in the 1990s and early 2000s, I thought personally that the culture of the fire department was a throwback to the 1950s. Since we do employment discrimination cases, most employers are more cognizant of issues of sexual harassment, race discrimination, and there are openly segregated stations within the fire department, and nobody does anything about it. There were problems with testing. Nobody was doing anything about it. They weren't even giving lip service to the kind of programs that most large employers have to make sure that people aren't discriminated against based on race or sex or age, things of that nature.
I think as of in 2017, 3 to 4 years since they'd even done any diversity training or training about discrimination or made any attempts to prevent it. And in a fire department where it seems widely accepted that there are at minimum some serious race issues here and some segregation going on, that was mind-boggling.
I started the fire department on January 31st, 1977.
I think I was March 15th, 1977, middle of March.
I was attracted to it because of the schedule, only having to work every third day rather than every day for 5 straight days. I also knew that there were no women doing it, so it was kind of like, can I break the barrier? That was a little bit of an impetus too. The instructors, I believe, were told, treat them like everyone else, they'll wash out. But then I think at some point it became, you better not let them wash out.
I was invisible. No one would talk to me. No one would look at me. I never knew who was gonna come up and grabbing your nipple and pinching it or twisting it. Yeah, who are you gonna report that to? I was always on alert, always.
I can recall being afraid to shower because the showers were in the male locker room.
No locks on the doors.
No locks. They'd come in and pull the curtain. I didn't trust them. When we first came on, it was bad. They didn't want us there. They wanted us out of the stations. They felt like we had invaded their space. And also at the same time, you've got the affirmative action going on, so then they're resenting the blacks that are getting promoted ahead of them. It didn't change. The only thing that I noticed once we filed our lawsuits is that it kind of went a little bit more underground.
It became polite discrimination.
Yes, for my whole career, it never left.
I've been a lawyer for a really long time, and one of the things when it comes to discrimination, you have corporations. You can't change how people think, but you can change how they act because they do what's economically feasible for them. And normally corporations, when they see that they have a policy that is promoting discrimination, they'll change it because it is in their best interests financially. The city does not operate with this good business judgment. And it's frustrating because it's not that cities should operate just like businesses, but you would hope that your governmental entities would take into consideration what is financially feasible for the community. And also, in my opinion, they have a higher duty because they're representing the people that are actually living within Kansas City, and they should promote diversity. They should promote anti-racism, anti-sexism. They just seem like they're blinded to all of these issues. They don't respond based on regular business practices, and they're not responding as good stewards of the taxpayers.
Expenditure of taxpayer dollars, particularly in situations like these, are are troubling, and so we need to find a way to address these long term. I do think that our change in leadership has been helpful. I have great respect for Chief Mays. I think that she has come to the department at actually at an important time, as we see in our country and our city, but also as someone who I think understands some of the new investments we need, both in not just training for new firefighters rather, but also training for those who've been on the department for some time.
It's just an up and down deal with the DeWalt battery, like a drill type battery that charges on the side of the ambulance there.
Today actually was the orientation for our incoming cadet class, but as part of that, we have a diversity and retention and recruitment committee, and they've been working on a pilot project on a way to interact with youth groups across the city, looking at different ways that we can recruit youth at a kind of a younger age and get them interested in the fire and EMS service, so that hopefully we can increase the pool of applicants and the diversity of the pool of applicants.
What are other outreach things we can do with those? To bring them through here one time is not enough. You know what I mean?
Me being a super minority within the fire service, obviously across the country, there's only about 3 or 4% women, I think, in the fire service in general, and the African American firefighters are firefighters I identify with, and they identified with me in that regard, and I got to work at some stations that were probably predominantly African American and never had any issues or felt very accepted, and I think they welcomed me there too.
Why is the fire department more heavily white than the city population or the rest of the city's employees?
For a multitude of reasons. Across the country in the fire service, I think that's historically it was a lot of European immigrants that came in, and that was the jobs that they could find, and so that's where people kind of started. You have to see people like you to be able to find that interest, and so that's why I think people follow in their family footsteps. As we move forward, we're trying to work towards making it a fair and equitable system for everybody and really kind of breaking the mold on some of those traditions. And it's not a perfect system. We're a microcosm of society. And at the end of the day, it is, this is your employment. Obviously, we have different rules and things than societal rules because of that. Obviously, we got to work within the confines of employment law and all of those things as well.
When you're looking to change institutions that have been around almost since the founding of our city, you have a lot of work to do, and will continue to have a lot of work to do. And this isn't shirking responsibility, it's just simply saying, everybody's going to work their level best to address it.
I think throughout my career, I saw it more through the prism of the good old boy system. Any group that systemically is seeking to promote themselves is consequently seeking to demote someone else.
Her and I both felt it needed to be done. Somebody's got to, at some point, stand up and say, hey, this isn't right, and things need to change.
If you're not the right color, you're not the right sex, you are gonna have a problem. And if you're not gonna have enough guts to say something or do something, as far as even outside of it, nothing's gonna happen. Even though I understand Donna Mays is the fire chief now, I believe she's gonna make a difference, honestly, because me knowing her, she's a fair person, and I don't see her letting a lot of that stuff fly by anymore. But it's so much stuff that they would sweep under the rug and hide and keep quiet and keep secret, and nobody would do nothing about it.